Our X-Files. Welcome to our X-Files Vault. Regular people talking about unexplained phenomena. UFOs. Ghosts. Cryptids. Hidden archaeology. Weird science. Our stories. Our takes. Our X-Files Vault.
Hey everybody, welcome to our X Vault. We're here with Jacob, and we don't have a very specific agenda for tonight's show, except that Jacob is that a band you're in, or is that just your own music? That we
I refer
posted
to
on the
it more
website.
as a project than a band because it's just me.
Okay. I mean, we should have brought in some clips here if there's any way we can bring that in. But the music, the album is really phenomenal. It's outstanding. I listened to it several times, and he also has told me that he draws on for inspiration from mythology and ancient religions and tarot cards and whatever else he's going to tell us about here. So that's where we're going to go with the conversation tonight. And we're working on the channel for, as some people know, a special documentary called Invasion. What will happen, or how will the aliens take over? So I'm gonna ask Jacob some questions on that and see what his reaction to it, as we're asking everybody on the channel whether they think that kind of thing is possible and whether we can fight back. So let's start out with talking about your music and what you're doing with it and how that, where you're getting your inspiration from. Take it away, Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, every album's a little different. The one that you heard, I think, Black Muse, that's inspired by the idea of like Lilith, or this sort of Jezebel type of spirit coming to sort of suck your energy in the form of a person, but also in the form of a spirit, but also give inspiration. So it's like anytime like I write something that is effective or potent, it's always like in a state of, you know what I mean, just it's in a painful state, but I always get that out of it. Like if I wasn't able to do that with it, it would just be like a bad experience.
Tell us about Lilith. I mean, if I remember right, isn't she an ancient Hebrew god or something that was maybe a little bit older than Yahweh or rival of Yahweh? I'm not really sure though. So tell me more about Lilith.
Okay, so they say before Eve was Lilith, right? It was Adam's original wife, and she didn't like having to be on the bottom during copulation, right? And so she rebelled. So she's this very strong, feminine, rebellious type spirit. And, and she was sort of damned for not obeying. And she ended up like at the edge of, the Red Sea or whatever, spawning demons. And there's this, this myth that Lilith will come to your home and it's either like snatch your baby or hurt your baby. So the idea of the lullaby, the word lullaby means Lilith be gone.
Oh, I didn't know that.
In the older version of that myth, lullaby means to sort of protect your baby so Lilith doesn't show up and take it or hurt it, kind of thing.
So that story survived into Christian times?
Yeah, it's... I mean, I've talked to Christians about it, and they say that that's like starts in the medieval times, that it's not an actual, Jewish tradition. So that one could be argued rather it really was, does stem back to the early Judaic days, or rather it was like a later invention. But yeah, it's an interesting one nonetheless, and a good archetype, to go off of creatively.
Yeah, I haven't read up on Lilith in a long time, and the only thing that seems to come into my mind is that, they've found carvings of Lilith going back to very early time, like early Hebrew time periods when Yahweh was still competing with other gods within the Hebrews before they had become a monotheistic culture. And that event, Lilith was at one time a god. I think maybe even at one time possibly a, related, in relations with Yahweh, and then eventually, as it became a monotheistic culture, they had to turn Lilith into something evil. But I'm not exactly sure. It's been a long, long time. So
that sounds right. Because before, like, the patriarchal gods, it was more like, feminine type worship and snake worship and stuff like that. There's the goddess Tiamat as well. I'm pretty sure that's Sumerian. So it's like in their religious, lore and their liturgy and stuff, they sort of redefine what these symbols and goddesses mean. And I think she had been split up and turned into the sea and the sky. She was, part serpent or something along those lines. So yeah, they did that with all like the feminine gods. And like, if you think about the serpent in Hindu culture, which is way older, that's a healing sort of archetype. And it's almost like their way of saying, well, those older, religions or pagan type religions, kind of putting a bad spin on it so they can replace it, with this monotheistic patriarchal god.
Yeah. I think there's like there's a couple of key transitions too. One is that as humans became agrarian, they switched from lunar gods to the sun god. And I believe the sun god may have been more associated with males for some reason. I'm not sure about that. So maybe,
in astrology it is.
In astrology it is? Okay, so that...
Yeah, sun is masculine, moon's feminine. At least in Western astrology. It depends on what part of the world. But
it's somewhat confused in my head because while I think the sun god is masculine and the lunar god is feminine, I agree. But also, an agrarian society would have sought more fertility gods, which would be more feminine god, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not. So that feels like a contradiction to me. I'm sure there's an explanation that I don't know it. Because at that transitional, now the Hebrews were actually not farmers. They were not an agricultural society, right? They were similar to now in the region, right?
More like carnivores, yeah.
Yeah, well, right. They were shepherds and travelers. So I think if when you look at the areas that they conquered from where the Bible, supposedly when they were taking the Promised Land, what they were doing was conquering agrarian civilizations. Like what was the city where Joshua blew his horn? What's the ancient city that I'm trying to think of? I should have done my homework before the podcast, but the ancient one, it's one of the oldest cities in the world, where supposedly they were after they had left Egypt and the Israelis they'd been promised this and they were trying to take this city. God, I can't remember the name of it, but it is an archaeological site where they can show has been destroyed and conquered over. It's one of the oldest cities in human civilization. And it'll
other than Jerusalem?
No, it's much older than Jerusalem. It'll come into my head when I'm not thinking about it. That's what'll happen. Hopefully before the show is over. But it was it Jericho? Jericho, I think that's it. The walls of Jericho. And, yeah. And they supposedly when they blew the horns, the walls fell down, and then the Israelis. And modern theory is that perhaps there was an earthquake, and that allowed the Hebrews to get through the walls and sack the city. But anyways, Lilith was in that mix of gods. That was a god, I think, at one time, but as Yahweh became the chief god, everything else had to be kind of considered a demon, right, or something similar. So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's almost easy to see now. Is it what have you ever watched American Gods or seen or read the book?
I've heard of it, but I never watched it.
It's on one of the it's actually very good, but the idea behind it is that these gods are alive only to the extent that they lose their strength when they're forgotten. And so a lot of the peoples
it's common.
yeah, and so a lot of the peoples that have come to America have lost touch with their old gods. So those old gods are fading away, but they're still clinging on and trying to fight back. Whereas, here in America, our god is commercialism and the media. So
Right.
like
Ronald McDonald.
TV is our god or something like that.
That's why we call them the golden arches, It's like the crucifix now. It's the golden arches.
Neil Germain. Oh God, I can't remember his name. If I have any of his books around, but he's a very good writer. I don't even have that word. I can think of it. Anyways, so how does that inspire your music?
Well, again, that dark kind of, feminine energy. A lot of the females I come in contact with throughout my life are very similar, like they'll have the same zodiac sign. They like say the same types of things. It's like almost like they're being manufactured on a conveyor belt somewhere in hell. It's a weird thing though to meet someone who's a
No, so are you saying they're all similar, or just similar types are drawn to you, or you're drawn to similar types?
Yeah, I'm drawn to that type of, person, but it's like very, archetypal, and sometimes, like, again, a lot of time their zodiac signs the same. It'll be around same time of the year kind of thing. Birthdays match up.
What type are you drawn to?
It keeps happening.
If it's not a secret, what type are you drawn to? I'm trying to think of what archetype are you thinking is involved here?
Well, yeah, I'd be like the Lilith type, or Jezebel kind of spirit, very willful, very dark, kind of vampiric. And there's that term psychic.
We're all
vampire.
drawn to them.
Yeah, I know, man. As soon as I see one, I just like, there'll be good ones around. I'm just like, but I mean, they always bring so much like inspiration, and they usually come and go pretty quickly. But like, it's almost like it's not even like there's a sexual attraction, but it's more than that. It's like it's sort of like I know I'm supposed to encounter that, even though I shouldn't. Somehow I cannot help it, even though I always get out. You know what I mean? I kind of get mixed up with it and then get out. But every time I write, create something, rather it's visual art or musical art, that it's totally responsible for that, for the work.
And there's a different type of archetype with that we're drawn to, that's a little different than saying being drawn to the mother or some of the other archetypes. But I'm curious too, like, so when you've made your music, particularly like when you've made a whole album like the Black Muse, does this happen after a breakup? So when you're going through like hard time, pain, or is it?
Yeah.
It does, huh?
But it's like a story that keeps repeating itself, almost like an archetypal story. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how astrology is anyway. It's like very circular, and so it's like the same spirit but in a different person, and it like keeps repeating.
Yeah. And
so I just kind of make the best of it, but it does create some very, like really potent work.
Well, you can capitalize on it for that reason. I'm thinking like myself that, if I was, now of course I'm older now, but when I was younger, when I was your age, if I was, I wasn't writing back then, but I've been writing for the last like 10, 11 years. And so back then, if I was dating someone that went through a breakup, people like, all right, now I can write a really good story.
Right. That's kind of how I feel about it. Some people think I'm crazy for, well, you didn't run when you found out that, you know, this new one was so, you know, so similar, same zodiac sign, same name, looks the same. I mean, that's just weird. It's easy if you're not in that situation to go, oh, it's just coincidence, but it's uncanny, man. It's spooky. But you know, I don't know. I guess
you do think certain personalities are connected in a zodiacal way to, you know, to when they were born?
Absolutely, but it's just a lot more complex than what people realize. You can't just go by like just the sun sign, you know. You know, you know, I'd say a lot of time there's truth in it, but you got to look at, there's an entire chart. It's like, you know, a snapshot of where all the planets were at that particular time. You know, on paper, it's a wheel, and it's divided into 12, you know, sections, and each section represents something different. And so where the planets are at that time, you know, some people say it affects you. Other people say, you know, I think that it's coinciding. I think it's synchronistic. Kind of like, think about like, okay, like movies like Clash of the Titans, where the gods are moving the humans around like chess pieces. Yeah. Right? Remember that movie? How they would do that, and you'd end up like some crazy faraway land. It's kind of like with that, right? A lot of people think that they're being moved around like chess pieces. I think it's more like the microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. So like what's going on with these huge, you know, heavenly bodies in space is synchronistic with what's going on with our physical bodies and the situations that we end up with in each other. And it even goes down to a molecular level of, you know, how your molecules, you know, the mathematical probabilities, the patterns that they're sort of
so we're caught up in these very, very powerful whirlpools of energy, and that were set in motion maybe all the way back at the beginning of time. So do you believe in free will?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one. It's easy to say no, because the planets like make you, you know, do this or that. So if you believe in astrology, but I believe in dimensions of time. So like, think about how when you see a star, you see something that burned out like 1 million years ago, but we're seeing it now. So that tells you that there's different dimensions of time that humans will perceive differently.
Sure.
So we're living in a 3D dimension, the way our central nervous system sort of interprets it. But in other dimensions of time that humans can't see, we've already done things that you know what I mean? In this dimension, we haven't done yet. And plus, you know, people who believe strongly in astrology believe that we sort of wrote a script for ourselves before we came here as humans.
Yeah.
So like our astrology chart is the script that we wrote in order to be able to fulfill our dharma. So in that sense, before you were born a human, you decided all these things for yourself. And in another dimension, you've already done them anyway. So that doesn't rule out free will, but it kind of takes it out of the human realm. So as a spirit, you decided to, but you know, in the human dimension, 3D, it could easily look like no.
So I'm curious about like someone I did a podcast with recently kind of talked about something similar. I'm going to be posting this today. She had an experience with what she called a near-death experience, and which she claimed saved her from 2 men that were trying to kill her, that were hired to kill her. And I absolutely believe that something happened to her and that she's telling the truth. Now, I don't know what she, you know, it's always interesting how we can change how we interpret events. Something happens, whether you had a dream or she calls it a near-death experience, but she didn't actually come under any physical harm. She was asleep and had kind of an outer body experience as these 2 guys were at her door. So, but she talked about how this idea of a soul contract, that she had the people that were in her lives, the main people in her lives, were people that she had a soul contract with. And so she's destined to be with them. And the way she found out about this was through this whole experience. It was kind of a being of light that kind of gave her some information, or information came into her through it. And so I'm wondering if, you know, we're thinking in terms of you, like, so you use the word decide. So you made a decision, certain events that you were going to take before you came into this life, into this body. So was that so do you see it that you were a conscious thing that was able to think about things and make a conscious decision? Or what do you mean by decision?
Well, that's the way, you know, my astrology teacher, that's, you know, her belief system, and the one I've taken on is, as a spirit, just, you know, you go through many lives, and when you come into this life, you need certain people to come into your life so you can learn certain lessons about things. Really, the whole idea is not having to come back. Like in Buddhism too, they have samsara. It's like a wheel, and notice it's a wheel, just like the zodiac. Where the idea is to not have to come back. We don't believe exactly in astrology. We believe it kind of keeps going, but you go through cycles and restart. It's more like that. But, you know, you have karma to fulfill. You know, the basic karma thing. If you've done things in the past, you have to take on a different role and learn those things in order to become enlightened. And once you go through so many lives, then you can kind of start over again.
I personally want to come back, or at least go somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm curious, so I'm, you know, so you can go through like all the 12 signs, and your moon is like, so say your sun is up here, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, the way that it's explained to me is each time you're born, that sun is going to be a little closer. Yeah. So like, you'll eventually hit an incarnation where the sun and the moon are like, they're pretty much right there together, almost on top of each other, like an eclipse. That means it's your last cycle. But again, you know, like the Buddhist sort of interpretation is that the idea is to escape samsara, even though most people don't. The way I was taught in astrology is super similar, but again, we just kind of keep going over and over.
Isn't the Buddhist idea kind of that here on this life is suffering? So they kind of look at it, you're trying to learn and build karma so you can escape suffering. Would that be, I'm not a Buddhist, so is that way off, or?
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. I mean, the idea here is that when you're stuck in the ego and the material and you're not aware of, you know, the energy around everything, and if you don't realize your connection to it or what else is there beyond your interpretation and your perceptions, you think of yourself as separate, so it creates suffering. And then that sort of, it kind of drives your behavior, you know, the way that you treat other people. It comes from this, egoistic behavior. As opposed to if you feel connected, you don't feel greed, you don't feel like controlling things. You sort of accept the whole picture.
I mean, I find all of that appealing, except for the rather big part that nirvana is reaching this state of nothingness, this state of there's nothing left to you, and you have nothing left to do, and nothing left to suffer, but nothing left to experience, nothing left to enjoy. I don't find much appeal in that, but
yeah, that's very common. I mean, that is hard to, like, you know what I mean, take in. Like, there's nothing. Sometimes I kind of more like refer to as what I think they're, you know, trying to say. It's not so much nothing as in there's no separation from anything. There's no form. So it's like, it's not that there's nothing, it's just everything but formless.
But for you, the individual, what is the difference between nothing and that state? I mean, you're not aware of anything. You're not experiencing anything. So I don't see any difference between that and just nothing and being dead or being obliterated. I don't really see much difference or any difference. But I don't mean that.
I mean, I think like what they're saying is there's like no distinctness in anything, but there's all presence, sort of.
Yeah.
So there's awareness, there's still consciousness, where nothing, there's like just nothing. So I think that maybe that's what they mean, but it's used the word nothing because we're trying to interpret it somehow. Like, in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah.
But again, what are you conscious of? That's where I mean, maybe I'm putting a westernized idea on that, but to me, subject and verb go together. Verb without a subject doesn't really make sense to me. And consciousness without being aware of something doesn't feel like consciousness to me. It just feels like a concept that doesn't make sense. But
I guess you would refer to as like pure subjectivity. Have you ever heard of samadhi? You know what samadhi is?
No.
So it's like when what you're looking at, you sort of absorb into it. That objective perception of it, that you're separate from it, disappears and you literally absorb into it. So that'd be like the best way to describe it, is like samadhi. And again, I mean, this is going off, the traditional sense of things, and I can only speculate on it. And some things, make sense and they sound good for me at this point in time. When it comes to afterlife or anything like that, there's theories that I'm comfortable with, and that works, but it's really hard. I can't say from experience, but that's the way that, you know what I mean?
But you can though. Well, you did decide, like you decided on this life. So did you forget whatever you were conscious of then? Is that missing now from your memory, or?
Yeah. That's why it's also like past life regression, stuff like that. Is like remembering that type stuff. But yeah, we forget, once we're here, but you can sort of have clues as to what it is. And when you start to sort of see it for, I guess, again, you can only, know it in glimpses and through symbols, and you can have deja vu, and you can have, inspiration and feel elated because of certain experiences. I think that's as close as you can get to remembering.
And I do think the theory probably is drawn from the experience of monks or Buddhists experiencing dissolution of the self, because you can get that from psychedelic drugs. That's one of the main effects of psychedelic drugs, is you undergo a certain degree of dissolution of self, which makes you, it has a lot of benefits. For instance, it makes people no longer afraid of dying. So I could see where somebody, and you don't, there are other ways to get the experience through different types of suffering, fasting, trance dancing and stuff like that. So whatever way the Buddhist meditations achieve this, they probably felt that dissolution of self and started to think, that's the goal,
Well, for me, like, I'm okay. So, like, I don't know how well tarot cards. There's the magician card.
Yeah.
So the magician card, he's got like his wand pointed up towards the heavens, and his fingers pointing down towards the earth.
Yeah.
Right. So where Buddhists would be, it's pure dissolution of the ego and of the self. Forget the ego world, the material world. That's the goal. For me, I think more as the magician, like I'm somewhere in between and a conductor. Yeah. So I get glimpses of that type of dissolution, but I also take the inspiration from it and put it into a form. So it's like my goal is not necessarily pure dissolution. It sounds like it'd be nice, maybe. But it's more like to sort of, be a conductor, between the two worlds.
Yeah. See, I wonder too.
So say to spend some time meditating every day. Say you spend an hour meditating every day, and there's some dissolution of the ego, and you're in complete bliss. Well, it means when you go back into the everyday world, that you function better, that you find more connection with it.
Right.
So it's like drawing from the inspiration of that world to have a more fulfilling more inspiring sort of experience here. But you know, if you don't completely get to that state of nirvana, that's okay. As long as you have like a really fun, interesting life. I don't think we're here to suffer. I think we're here to play.
Yeah,
that's the way I look at it. You know,
then why would we want to why would we want to ever get out of that then? Or, you know, why would we want to just keep going to another round of playing? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I agree with you. And if things are cyclical, why wouldn't the cycle just keep going and going and going? I mean, because I think even like in terms of dissolution of the ego and the sense of self, it's like a lot of things, everything in the right balance, the right proportion, right? So a lot of us do suffer from too much ego or too much a sense of self, and that creates even a sense that maybe even leads to some of our suffering, or it leads to certain dysfunctional things within the social organism. So you want to lessen that, but you don't want to destroy it and completely wipe it out. Maybe there's a benefit to reducing our sense of self, and we get that benefit from trance and psychedelic drugs maybe, but maybe there's such a thing as you don't want to go too far, because then you're just obliterated, you know.
Yeah, and there are gurus who that's more their belief. There's like, you know, about Sufis, they're like Arabic mystics, and they believe that it's more about properly integrating that part of the self that is beyond the ego into the personality. Yeah. So it's not about completely getting rid of the ego, but properly integrating it and having a harmonious experience based on, you know, truth about who you really are and being comfortable in it. And I love that compared to just like demonizing the ego completely, you know? So I think we're here to have experiences, and that's it. I think the spirit's just really curious. Yeah. You know, and that's how I live, like kind of like a kid, just like always curious, even if it's bad, you know, dark. I just gotta know, man. Yeah.
So do you think that some of these, let's start with Lilith, but any of the other spirits or demons or anything, do you think those kind of beings exist, or are they just kind of archetypes that inspire us, or do you think there's any actual real existence to any of these things?
I mean, man, I'm pretty open to stuff. You know, we talked once before on the phone, we were talking about the supernatural experience I had, and objects were moving, man. They were moving. There was like me and two other people who saw it. So I mean,
why don't you tell the audience, since they don't know the story? Okay. So tell your story about that.
Okay, so it's like when I was 12 years old, I lived in Kentucky. Me and my mom lived in this old man's house. It was like this creepy old dude, like in his 80s. His wife had died in the house, and she was his caretaker. His name was Mr. Chin. There's this creepy old dude with this creepy old cat, hair falling off of it, like 10 years old for, you know, old for a cat. And I lived there for, you know, almost a year. And I didn't really have any experiences until the last night I was there, but my mom always talked about stuff like that. I just thought maybe, you know, flashback from 1960. I don't know. Yeah. Anyone who came in, everyone always noticed this. There was like sand in the carpet for some reason. I don't know, it was made that way. So when people stepped on it, you could hear the sand, like you're walking on sand. And, you know, like my cousin was in there, you know, fixing the toilet, he could hear that sand. He was in there by himself, and I would hear that all the time, like someone's walking, but it's just, you know, it's a sound. Who knows? That never got to me. But the last night we were there, we were actually going to move out, you know, the next day. We had our stuff back. My friend had spent the night, and there was like this chip bag like rustling, like. And I thought he was messing with me. I was like, come on, dude, you know, whatever. And dude, we weren't you know, neither one of us were anywhere near it. And that's
called a mouse.
Yeah, really. Yeah, so I'm trying to rule out the normal stuff, you know? Yeah. Like maybe it's a mouse, maybe it's a breeze. And when I went down to touch it, the curtains just started like just going crazy, like shaking. And we went and got my mom. I hate to admit, we were big wimps, and we, you know, 12-year-old kids, mom, you know. And so then we went into the TV room. So it was me, my friend, and my mother, and then we were in there for a minute, and then the lamp started like shaking like this, and dude, we were freaking out. So we were on our way out, right? We were leaving the house, and there was this wrestling magazine. It was like there was this refrigerator that sat this way, like an ice cream fridge in a gas station. It was sitting on top of that. It was Ric Flair. He was on the cover. I remember exactly like what it was. So it was a wrestling magazine with Ric Flair on it, and it like picked it up, like and just threw it. It's not the same as
like the spirits didn't want you guys leaving. That knew you were moving out, or
I think it didn't. Yeah, that's weird because if it didn't want us there, we would have done that a year ago.
Right.
But it did it our last night there. At least in my experience, my mom had other things she talked about. She could see an apparition, like spitting at her or something crazy like that. She talked about seeing the apparition of this old woman, Mr. Chin's wife. And again, without experience, I don't know, maybe she's nuts, but I mean, this stuff I saw, man, there's just no way that someone did it as a joke. There's no way there were 3 people, we all like saw it, and like, we never went back. And it was just always a creepy place, man. He was a creepy old guy doing creepy shit all the time. I mean,
but you kind of had the setting set for your minds a little bit too, because you were living with a creepy guy and you already had, so that gave you a creepy feeling. Not that he was creepy, he was an older guy, but I mean, and the cat was a little creepy too. So as kids, you're already kind of primed to interpret something. I'm just trying to, say what a skeptic might remind you of, but I'm not.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. But man, when you see stuff move by itself,
yeah.
You know what I mean? There's no way you, like, 3 people can imagine that. You know what I mean? It's just no way. Cause I always try and first like go, well, maybe it was this. Like, okay, I have this other experience. I was with my grandmother. I was doing her astrology chart, right? And I was like on point doing the astrology chart. And there was a plastic cup sitting on the table. And I looked at her, I said something about the chart that was like spot on. And we looked at each other and the cup was like sliding across the table. So my first thought is, what is a condensation? We'll move a cup sometimes. So maybe. But the feeling that went with it, it's like I was looking through her at that moment. And everything was like fake, like a painting, except for her eyes. Like, instead of like the bodies here and the walls back here, it sort of merged into one dimension the way I was seeing it, but her eyes were real. And like we both looked kind of through each other when it happened.
She experienced it too, or something similar? Or?
Yeah. So like, again, man, my mind wants to say it was condensation from the cup. I've seen that happen before. And I've went through it 100 times going, could it move it in that way without leaving a trail of water behind it? It was a plastic cup. It had liquid in it. I mean, that can happen, right?
I've never seen it happen.
I mean,
I've never seen it happen.
Like, my mind, I saw it once before, where a guy was pouring some tea in this little tiny cup in it, and it moved real quick, but it's a weird thing to, happen. But, again, the way my mind works, I still want to, explain it scientifically first. I don't want to jump right to it being supernatural, but if you pair it up with the way the moment felt and what I was doing at the time and our history in the house, had a lot of negativity in that house. And there were times where I definitely felt like there was something dark, like, present. Okay, another experience in that house too, like the original Lilith that, that I knew originally as a teenager.
First girlfriend.
She was my girlfriend. Yeah, before the copies came, like the doppelgangers. She was the original one that, but I remember around that time, I mean, I was just going through some dark shit and having some dark feelings. And I didn't say anything to her about it. But she was laying on my couch with me, and she said she could feel something hovering above us, and she pointed to it above the couch over in the corner, the same place I thought about it being. I sensed it being there but didn't say anything to her, and she picked up on it too, right in the same spot.
What did she say?
So I mean,
just a sense?
it's not that we could see it as much as we could sense where it was at, like in the room.
Yeah, so
She
like
pointed
something,
to the same place. Yeah.
so like something like an otherworldly being, a spiritual being, or something of that nature. Or...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not just energy, like all pervading energy, but something that had its own presence, its own location, like in the room, but we couldn't see it, but could sense it. But it was weird that she pointed right to where I was thinking it was at.
Yeah.
So, I mean, those are the strongest experiences I have where I'm, you know, very convinced, not just like a weird, creepy feeling, but, you know, experiences where something moved or someone could locate the same thing in the same area.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for those reasons, I'm open to aliens as well. I've never had an experience with one. I'm open to demons as well, because again, if stuff like that can happen and defy science, who knows what else?
Right.
So I've always wondered that, is like, so demons are thought of as like these gory, disfigured things. Well, maybe people just saw corpses in the past and didn't know what it was, you know, like primal type people, and thought, well, it's probably, you know, it's evil. Look at it. It's probably a demon looks like that, or a goat seems evil. You know, they put these things together in their head. So I've always thought, is it just our experience, what we pin to it, or are there actually dimensions where these things have a visage, you know? But I believe in definitely a presence, or, you know, something like that. And I've always, you know, growing up, I've always been compelled to play with it and try and see it, and, you know, play my Ozzy records backwards, and, you know, stuff like that.
So
but
you're more intrigued by it. You're more intrigued by it than afraid of it.
I'm afraid of it too, but I like being afraid of it, you know?
Yeah.
So just like the women I meet, like the Lilith type women, I'm afraid of them, but I can't help it. And the funny thing, astrologically, Lilith, so you have a Lilith, it's a dark asteroid. So instead of Jupiter, Mercury, you have a Lilith in your birth chart. And like mine's in a very prominent spot. It's in my first house, which is important. So I could see where, you know, it would attract, like there's an attraction there. And then, you know, it's in the sign of like Leo. So Leo's creativity and that type of thing. So creativity inspired by Lilith, you know, is a very important thing. So I think of her as almost like, you mentioned in one podcast, how do you pronounce it? Daemon instead of demon?
Yeah.
Greeks believe in
It's Deamon, I believe, or Dae.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like Middle Easterners would say the jinn.
Yeah, the daemon is more, it's like an intricate, it's like a part of you. It's an intricate connection to you. There's different ways of looking at it, but one way is the idea that before you were born, you were one entity. And then when you were born into this world, you split into two. And one of you is the part that's in this world, but this other part that's connected, deeply connected to you, that is in, it's an early form of looking at the soul too, but in this case, the soul is outside of you instead of within you. So,
and it gives you like access to information that you can't get.
Yeah, well, and it may have a better sense of what you're supposed to do with your life. So if you can tune into or listen to your daemon or follow your daemon, it'll lead you towards the path that you're supposed to take. Mm-hmm. So it's similar to a guardian angel, or it may have, you know, but it's different. But it may have inspired what eventually became considered a guardian angel. But it's an intricate part of you that in theory, will be reunited with you at your death. That's my understanding.
but it's in the metaphysical realm. It defies logic and typical.
Oh yeah, I mean it's an ancient. I think the concept begins with the ancient Greek. So I'm not trying to argue that it's part of any current religion, or it's just something that was well known to the Greeks. It's one of their concepts that has came out in different forms and may have led to the idea of the soul. I don't know that the ancient Hebrews had that on their own before that. I'm not sure that they did. I don't think they did. So although I'm sure other cultures have had ideas of souls and spirit underworlds and stuff, but I do believe that it maybe fed into some of the ideas that we have about the soul, and we have a dual nature where we have a.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe somehow that's tied in with like when they say someone like sold their soul or something, or like if they practice divination, like psychic reading, that they're like Christians would say you're talking to the devil. I was thinking somehow that's what it is, but in the Greek terms it's not like a negative sort of thing.
It's not a negative thing at all. It's something that you want to follow. I guess unless your destiny is to be a serial killer, then maybe you want to resist it. I don't know. Right. I don't think that they had anything like that in that culture. But the idea was this was you were split apart when you came into this world, but if you follow that, it'll guide you. It'll guide you better along. In your case, think of it as a muse. It's your muse, your black muse. But it's your
black. Exactly. That's what I was trying to kind of get at. So when I meet a girl like this Lilith, it triggers my daemon, right? Yeah. I feel as like my highest self with her, and I feel very elated and inspired. But then somehow like my energy is taken, or I'm attacked, and I've had some weird experiences with the energy type thing too, being taken, like vamped. But it's like almost from like
other
I'm
people. You like from being from other people, what they call psychic vampires, or from like a spiritual thing, like which is it? Both. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suspect sometimes these night terrors and stuff I have, or there's this. Okay, so like this one girlfriend I had, other people would refer to her as a succubus. People have said that about her before, but I remember one time I was spooning her while she was sleeping, and right in my groin area, I felt energy being sucked out of that area, like into her vaginal, into her astral vagina. But dude, I swear to God, it was like something got like, like a golf ball through a hose or something, like this really it was like painful, but not in the same way like, like stubbing your toe is painful. It's like the energy was painful and went bloop, and like got like, it was so weird, man. It was almost like just.
And maybe you're just attracted to these girls because they're really, really hot, and because they're hot, they're a little bit selfish. I'm not saying that all hot girls are selfish, but maybe some of them are, because they can be, because you maybe a little more likely to be selfish when you can be selfish. And so maybe eventually you get tired of the selfishness.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just the price I'm willing to pay for a little while. But that's on like one dimension. But then there's this more spiritual dimension, which that maybe the reason it all wasn't even sex. Sex was like a nice, second benefit. But it's like, for some reason, I could walk away. I could not. If it seems like if I had a free will, I wouldn't do that. But I mean, that is like the
attraction is attraction is a hard to resist kind of force, and you look at, like, usually we see this more on the other side, where women, particularly young women, are attracted to the bad boy, and a lot of times they even know they shouldn't be, and it gets them into trouble, but over and over they get down that, and eventually some of them usually outgrow it, and then they look for someone more stable. But I can understand that, though, because in primitive, in our ancient history, before we were civilized, if you're a woman and you're pregnant, or expect to be your purpose in life is at that age, as a primitive creature to be pregnant, you want to protect her. And so someone that is violent shows strength and an ability to protect you. So it totally makes, I'm sure I just pissed off any women that just listen to this, but I hope they understand. I'm talking about ancient drives that are biological inside us that are different for men and for women. And I think that there is a powerful urge for that can be appealing, make them drawn to the bad boy, because they react to it as though it's strength.
Well, because if they stand up to her, they're going to stand up to anyone who bothers her too. You know what I mean? If they're aggressive and they're tough, yeah, they're gonna. Yeah, they like that they feel protected. Yeah, So, I'm sure they want more of a happy medium. Don't attack her. You know what I mean? They probably want to be protected, but not attacked by it.
9 out of 10 women that I have known don't have this problem. They may understand it at least a little bit on some level, but they learn to recognize that that's not what they want, something more than that anyway. So hopefully we're not creating a Me Too moment here, but
so I have it from the male perspective, basically.
Yeah, but it can't be exactly the same because you're not looking for a protector. So and if
no,
you were,
but it's
you'd be
a
looking for a
thing that's bad for me, but I can't help it, and it's dangerous.
Yeah. And there is always something appealing to all of us human beings to danger. There's something that excites us about it, right? And maybe that's why we watch horror, right? Or we like a good thriller, and we like a roller coaster. I think there is something that makes us feel alive, and maybe something deeper than even that we're drawn to something that is dangerous. I don't know why. I'm not a psychologist, so.
Yeah, it's like maybe in the face of death, the value of life increases as you get closer to facing it. All of a sudden, you're a lot more aware. I know, in Satanism, like Anton LaVey type Satanism, he says that they have the Gothic imagery or the skull to remind them every day that they're going to die. So they better make the most of this life every single day and make the strongest impression upon it and achieve as much as they can before that comes, because you're not going to get another one. Yeah, kind of thing. That's a pretty healthy outlook, really. I mean, if you're not spiritual, you don't believe in, being born again and stuff like that. If you're atheist, that's a very healthy outlook. I think it's good.
I mean, I was raised a Catholic. I started questioning God very early. I would say by freshman, sophomore year in high school. I know for sure by sophomore year, I was asking a lot of hard questions to the religion teacher at our school. And just kind of contradictions to me that didn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? Because I've always been the kind of person, like I don't just, you tell me things and I'm just going to accept them without thinking about it. That's not me. I tend to ask questions and for good or for bad. And so, certainly by the time I graduated high school, I would say I was definitely an atheist, but I respected religion though. I mean, I respected people that had religious beliefs. I believed that they had a lot of advantages to have that kind of belief system. And I've went most of my life that way. But I would say that starting in the late 1990s, I opened up a little bit from a strange perspective. I started reading up about quantum physics. And when I read about quantum physics, I realized the universe is way fucking stranger than anybody ever pretended to admit in science class. It's strange at the most fundamental level. And those experiments were done in the 1920s. And they go to the very heart of what reality is or isn't. And scientists still can't explain it. In fact, basically there were two possible explanations for what they were finding in what's called the observer effect, is that reality depends literally on an observer. Without an observer, Reality only exists all that exists is what they call a superposition, in which all possible realities are equally exist equally, and only once the observer is brought in it's called the collapse of the wave function, does this superposition finally collapse into what we would call reality. And the only other explanation that they've come up with it, and this is the one that most scientists now accept, but with great reluctance, because it's just as to me it's even worse, is the idea that all those realities that exist, every possible reality exists in the superposition. Well, what they commonly think is that this thing is constantly dividing the universe everywhere and at all times, infinitely dividing into another universe, an infinite number of universes where every reality is so every reality literally does take place. So when you come to a fork in the road, you actually do take both, and that is going on everywhere in the universe all the time, and there's no way to stop it. It's called the many worlds theory. And most physicists, these are some of the smartest people in the world now, accept this, but they accept it only because they don't like the idea of an observer creating reality, because that feels too much like religion to them. So but there's no
responsibility.
Yeah, because there's literally as far as we can tell, there's no way to test this idea of an infinitely splitting universe. So there's no more reason for them to accept that belief than there is to accept the idea that we observers are creating the universe. The former feels too much to them like woo, so they won't accept it. But yet they accept the many worlds theory, which is, to me, is absurd. But I can't find any reason to accept one more than the other. But the idea of the world constantly splitting like that makes reality meaningless. There is no meaning to anything, because there's no such thing as anything, because everything exists, and all possibilities exist somewhere, and that to me doesn't make sense to me. So
it comes around to that sort of nothingness, but it's not nothingness. It's nothing separated from anything else. There's
right. So it's not nothing. It's everything. But when you have everything, then everything becomes meaningless. So that to me is similar. It's a form of nothingness. So to me, if you go the other way, if the observer is creating reality, now whatever that means, so the observer in an experiment looking at photons going through slits, which is the double slit experiment, is where this comes from. All right, so that's one observer creating one tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of reality, which is the photon choosing what slit to go through. What does that mean in the larger scope of things for the whole universe? Does that, so is it the collective observation that's going on? What happened at the Big Bang when there were no observers, or were there observers? I don't. There's a lot of deeper questions with that. And actually, if I haven't completely lost you here, there's these experiments that they've done in recent years, and it's called the quantum eraser. And what they do is they run this same experiment where these photons are sent through, but they bounce them around in mirrors. And what they found is that the observer, further down the line, if there's an observer and where the observation takes place, that goes back in time and affects the photon in the choices it made earlier on. So can the observer effect go backwards in time, which caused some physicists, actual physicists, to say, does this mean our observations are creating the Big Bang? Our observations.
It's possible.
Our observations now, in looking in this, in this past century, and looking back, is that what is creating the Big Bang? So if that kind of stuff is possible, then why the hell can't a demon be possible? Why the hell can't Lilith?
Totally, yeah.
I mean, anything. If that is what science has shown to be possible, then anything is possible. So that brought God back into the equation for me. The idea that there may be some kind of being. I'm not talking about an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful being. That an old man in robes, or none of that that's all mythology. But could there be some kind of being that has come out of the universe? Maybe even that's the purpose of the universe, is to create this kind of being that knows itself, and it slowly comes to increasingly know itself. Is this where, so that to me seems at least not impossible, whereas I would have thought that was impossible 25, 30 years ago. Now it seems.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm at, man.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a third dimension. We can only perceive things in a certain way.
Yeah.
Maybe a big bang to us is just a tiny little movement, on a bigger scale of things. So I think humans can be pretty like egocentric and arrogant about. So we have this dimension that we're sort of looking at and taking apart and analyzing, and it functions this way by cause and effect, and we can say that about it, but that's only from that perspective.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there. Existence, consciousness, whatever it is that pervades all this, but also goes beyond it.
Yeah.
So this is just our little experience on a grand scale of things. It leaves a lot to be open, and it makes you feel a lot smaller. Like, there's a whole
but in some ways bigger.
Yeah, like you can achieve more, and you realize the universe is like a bigger place.
Yeah.
And that there's magic, to reality, but at the same time, you have to accept that you're not quite as powerful in the grand scheme of things. But at least there is some meaning, and you may have some purpose in being here. Or, purpose is a loaded word, but you know what I'm saying? There may be some benefit or some, you're not just an atom floating in space like the materialist view would be, that briefly is in existence and gone, that you're worth no more than a photon going through space that's shot out from a star. I think a physicist would say you're no more meaningful than that. But with this view, the universe is expansive, and it's dynamic, and it's immense, but at least you do have some small meaningful part within it. I don't know, does that make sense? I think the most meaningful thing is to be able to uncover that and to see yourself in other people, or to share that experience and see that you do have those things in common, to see that you're both. It's sort of like it's reality looking back in on itself. So they say like science is God's way of looking back in on itself. Yeah. So as we discover these scientific secrets, we're getting closer to revealing what reality truly is, and seeing it for what it is. And I think to share that experience, and I think that means that probably is the biggest meaning, is to uncover the truth of that reality as close as you can, and to share it with other people. I mean,
see, I believe, so and I did not invent this. I've come to believe this, maybe through my own, but there are physicists out there who say this too, that the universe is in a form of it self-evolving, and it's becoming aware of itself, and that is part of its kind of, I don't want to use the word purpose, because purpose almost implies it's something set it up that way, and that's going too far. But the idea is that the universe is trying to evolve in a way so that it comes to know itself, so it comes to experience itself, so it comes to be aware, self-aware. So to use the time frames, even though I know time is somewhat of a loaded term too, but if you look at, say, the beginning of time, and then look at where the universe is now, then the universe is more aware of itself now than it was at the beginning of time. It's something that's in progress. And actually, even I was listening to a physicist, his name is Paul Davies, and he was talking about how it may be, they're looking for signs that the laws of the universe, or the so-called universal laws, right, that scientists have been studying for the last several hundred years, that some of these things may not be laws, or they may not be constants in the way that we think they are. And they're finding some evidence, it's not proven now, that maybe, for instance, billions of years ago, the parameters were slightly different than they are now, the settings on some of these laws, okay? The equations were more or less the same, but the actual settings on, say, like the cosmological constant, some of these kind of things, which I don't really know what they are, but but there are certain things that are related to these universal laws. So in other words, the universal laws are still evolving and adjusting very slowly over the course of the universe. And so I've kind of believed something similar to this myself, but I only discovered this physicist recently. His name is Paul Davies, and he actually has written several popular books on this. I think his most recent one.
The idea of an expanding universe, right? It makes sense.
Well, actually, you know, what's funny too is now we know the universe is expanding, and most physicists believe that based on the data, the destiny of the universe is to go on expanding until it's stretched out so thin that there's no energy left in it. Everything is just goes completely cold, and there's nothing left. They're just, if there's any particles left, they're just sitting there. There's nothing left to them. But Paul Davies doesn't think that'll happen, because he thinks because the universe is evolving itself, it's in a phase of expanding for its own reasons, but eventually it'll start to contract again. But it's not that it's going to contract into a ball. It's not going to do that either. It's going to do what it wants to do. It's not going to die. It's going to keep evolving in the way that it wants to. We're trying to put that in human terms, so I use terms like awareness, but it's going to continue to evolve into whatever it is it's trying to evolve into.
And so those parameters change, where the old idea was that it's going to spread itself thin. The parameters change before it gets there.
Right.
That's not tested.
Right. If you change, if you change the cosmological constant just a little bit, right, it starts to shrink. So you'll start to see it start to adjust. Now, there's no known mechanism for that. So that's something that, if Paul Davies is right, they would still have to discover what is the mechanism, or, you know, what is the force. And I haven't read his book. I'm thinking about buying it, but I don't want to spend $12 these days, but I might do it. But it is I believe his theory is that information is what's essential to the universe. It's essential to life. Life is based on information. And so somehow there's a mechanism where this information is pervasive through the universe, and there's feedback loops, and that's somehow is how things are changed. That's how very, very slowly over vast periods of time. So it's not like suddenly tomorrow you're going to wake up and gravity is going to be different. No,
it's very gradual. But you're saying it's changing because of the information that's collected.
Yes.
You said everything's information and the parameters change. So again, that's consciousness taking part in the shape of the universe.
It depends what you mean by consciousness, because information right now is what is ruling our computers, right? And there's information that are keeping them going, but they're not conscious. At least we don't think of them that way, as conscious. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's consciousness, but I would say that you're right. I would say that I do believe that there is a level of consciousness that is, if you define consciousness as self-awareness, then I would say yes. I think that's probably the main goal. If you were a universe, that's what you'd want, is to be self-aware. Unless you're a Buddhist universe.
Right, then it's like, yeah. Yeah, again. So I mean, what about consciousness in relation to information? So computers are built on information, right? So information is like reflective of what we're conscious of. So it's our consciousness being put into a form, which in that sense, we can have more control over the shape of what we're conscious of.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I guess, that information can exist without consciousness, but consciousness cannot exist without information. I don't know. That's probably simplistic, but I mean, and I would think that, like you were mentioning earlier, there's these kind of patterns swirling through the universe that we're often in the grips of, right? But maybe in that swirling, is it over time, it's congealing in a way that helps create higher levels of self-awareness. Maybe there's a way of accumulating all of the, so you're self-aware and I'm self-aware and all the other 7 billion people are self-aware, but maybe there's a way of adding that together. And so we could use the word collective conscious or collective unconscious or something. I'm not sure if it's, obviously we're highly speculative here, so I have no idea what any of this stuff means. But I mean, there's a way that if the universe is conscious on a bunch of individual levels, those can still be added up in a way that increases to a larger, and maybe that focuses in some,
which is why the parameters are changing.
Yeah.
So as we become more collectively conscious,
yeah,
that becomes reflective of those parameters changing to where it, it changes the way so it's basically another way of saying is we become more conscious, the behavior of the universe changes to reflect that. So
I think that's a very good conclusion on that. Yeah, why not? I mean, that makes sense. I don't know if we're the highest form of consciousness in the universe. We do seem to be the highest form here on this planet. So yeah, I would say that if something similar is going on across the universe, yeah.
So yeah, this vastness, this universe, it's like macrocosm and microcosm.
Yeah.
They're reflective of each other. And that's where I always go back to is the argument of, is it cause and effect or is it synchronistic? Is it reflective? Like in astrology, do the planets shift and have certain alignments and then that causes us to do something, or the things we're doing, smaller reflections of bigger bodies are doing? So I kind of think more along the lines of synchronicity rather than cause and effect.
Yeah.
And also of, instead of like this being created, self-creating at every moment. And then because of the way that we perceive time, with the apparatus that we have, we see a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right.
But that's just the way we're perceiving it and sort of putting it, into a scope. But there wasn't really a beginning and there won't be an end. Conscious things are, so creation is always going on. It's not like it's created, then it's dead. Creation is a permanent process that's going on every second.
Well, if the universe is more conscious now than it was X amount of time ago, then maybe there is a little bit of a beginning and an end. But that's not to say that there's also another larger sense of holistic sense where what's going on now is also impacting what went on further back in time, which reverses cause and effect. So it may be a little bit of both. So I mean, I still think that it's useful to think of cause and effect, but it may not be as simple that everything in the universe is governed by cause and effect. Maybe there may be ways for that information to flow backwards or something to flow backwards, right? I don't know, but it's very hard for our little human minds to grasp something like that. But
yeah, that's what I'm saying about timelines. It's from our perspective, there's a timeline. But if energy can't be, can't be destroyed and can't be created,
that's
it can just
what physicists say,
form. So I mean, going from that perspective, it's like we're this world within a vastness, a void of energy that's got some kind of shape or probability, right? That takes on a form, but it just keeps changing.
And I think what they actually say is it's information that can't be destroyed. Maybe energy too. I'm not sure. Yeah, I know the main thing is information, because that was one of the big problems with black holes. Is once they realized that over time, nothing in theory can escape a black hole, right? And that over time, black holes do eat themselves up, and then they will disappear. So if they disappear, they take all the information with them. And that proved a huge contradiction to their understanding that information cannot be destroyed. And I don't know, I'm not Leonard Susskind is a physics who's had some big breakthroughs on that. He's great to watch his videos on YouTube.
So
Very
it's
high
like
level.
the information. So it's like saying the information about the object that disappeared into the black hole, the information about that object, you can still have. If there's a ship and it got sucked into a black hole, the information, the size of the ship, the weight of the ship, everything you could know about the ship, that did not disappear, but the object.
That's what they've been trying to work out, because when the black hole disappears, and since nothing can escape the black hole, that what that would mean is that the black hole, when it disappears, violates the fundamental principle of physics that no information can be destroyed. It's because all those things, all those particles that got sucked into the black hole during its life, that's all information. That's, the location and the size of those particles, that's information. If you throw a penny into a black hole, that's information, the structure of that penny. So if that all gets destroyed, then but they've come, I believe the solution they came up with to it was that maybe Stephen Hawking proposed it, was that Hawking radiation. So there actually is something that escapes from the black hole. And I think they've now found traces of this in astronomy. They can actually see black holes and they can see this Hawking radiation escaping from it. So I guess that information would be in that radiation that comes out of it, so it doesn't disappear completely. I don't know if it comes out and it's indecipherable. To me, it's still destroyed, but I'm sure a physicist will tell me why that's not true. So I don't know.
Right.
But that's why that's what they've gone with, is the idea is that I think that's what led Hawking to theorize that black holes leak. And I think since that's been proven with observations since then. But it's there's another interesting part of that too, was that all of the information, I think what they said, when it goes through a black hole, so that penny goes through the black hole, all the information about the penny remains on the event horizon, like on the inner part of that or something, or on that membrane that would be considered the event horizon, the point of no return. It all maintains. It all is that information is maintained, is represented in two-dimensional form on that membrane on the inside of the black hole, which is really strange. Okay. Because then it led them to wonder. They looked at that same thing and they applied it to the universe as a whole, and they found, I don't know how they were able to study this, but they found that it applied to that too. So this is where they came up with the holographic universe theory. Based on their data, the universe that we live in, the entire thing is somehow a holograph, which means it is really just two-dimensional information that is somehow expressed three-dimensional, just like a holograph is. They don't know what that means, so then somehow they're able to conclude that and not have no idea what it means. Somehow the universe exists somewhere entirely in two-dimensional form, information that exists in two-dimensional form. So are we inside some larger black hole that we're inside of, and we're just kind of, our universe is on the membrane of that? I don't know. This is way beyond anything that
I know, it's fascinating, man. I mean, it expands my imagination. That's the best part about it. Yeah, because the event horizon of your imagination. You know what I mean? That's where it can be like endless, and within light or within darkness. You can't see what's beyond all that darkness, but to sit there and swim in the imagination of it, and where like all logic disappears.
That sounds like a good name for you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you say a good name for
a good name for your next album. Event Horizon.
Is yeah, there you go. Event horizon of the mind. I always think of it like this, like it's almost like it mirrors it. Like, so they say we only use 10% of our brain. We have this deep subconscious that we don't know anything about. It's reflective of outer space, right? We only know like a percentage of the universe, and then it goes, so it's like it goes outward and inward at the same time. So to me, like everything just comes back to a reflection and it being synchronistic and somehow also being circular, you know? So that's kind of how I think is more like microcosm, macrocosm. So I think a lot of those things, you know, intuitively, like I'm not a scientist, so it's not like I can explain this stuff the same way, but
yeah, no, neither one of us can. So
yeah, intuitively, I feel like it is reflective of that as we discover ourselves and, you know, what our soul is and what our psyche is. We're also at the same time, you know, traveling outward through space. And so, I mean, maybe as we figure out what we are, that's reflective of as we figure out about those black holes. There's a lot we don't know about ourselves and about, you know, why we exist and what we're actually made of. Like, you know, the brain is the central nervous system, and the brain makes me move my fingers, but what makes me decide to want to move my fingers, to have to use my brain to begin with?
Right.
I mean, what deciphers that? It's like a will, right?
Right.
I mean, yeah, the brain makes that decision, but why is the brain doing that?
Yeah.
There's something way more mysterious that is driving us. So I believe in the biology. It's not that the brain isn't doing that. I definitely wouldn't argue that it's not, but there's something else that's driving our actions. And a determinist would say things that happened 1,000 years ago set off a trail of events that's making us have this conversation, you know, from where we live in this particular place at this time. That's determinism. Where
that is what physicists say. Almost pretty much all physicists are, I don't want to say all, but most physicists say there's no such thing as free will. It's not even something, there is no physical theory in modern science that even could explain, that even allows for the possibility of free will. There's no way they could understand that. So what they say is that everything that is happening now is happening exactly how it must have happened at the time of the Big Bang. From then forward, everything was destined to happen the way it is. There is no free will. There's no freedom of action. But I do want to, before we end this, just because it's getting late. I've been now doing these podcasts for a while now, between yours and the one I did before. But I'm curious, along the lines of what you just said, do you think it's possible? There are some people that say the brain is more of something along the lines of a radio transmitter. That is, so in other words, if you didn't have a physical brain, you wouldn't be able to have a consciousness in the way that we understand it, but only in the way that, like if you had a radio, you wouldn't be able to listen to the show. But the radio waves are still out there. That's just a piece of equipment that allows you to tune into the show. And there are some people that are looking at, I think even Roger Penrose is looking at it. He's, you know, recently just won the Nobel Prize. He's one of the smartest physicists there is. But he's someone that's taken a slightly different view on consciousness and, you know, what this stuff is. And I think he maybe looks at it that way, where the brain is more of a device, the physical brain is more of a device that's used to tune into things. He's not saying where the signal comes from, but I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, that's how I think of things, like from a spiritual perspective, is that, you know, emotions even are just like you're tuning into things all the time, and, you know, you're vibrating at a certain frequency. So, like, you know, the idea of if you're in a good mood or a bad mood can depend on, you know, instead of the thoughts that accompany it, I'm having bad thoughts about a certain thing that happened, and you sort of get rid of the thoughts and you just sort of focus on what frequency you're sort of vibrating on, and you raise that vibration. Yeah. So, like, instead of going through psychotherapy, you sort of work on focusing on relaxing and, you know what I mean, vibrating literally at a higher frequency. So your whole body's like sort of like, you know, a radio or, frequency transmitter. And that's the way that I've kind of learned to think, and it helps me have more control over my moods, and stuff like that, or like what you're aware of. You know what I mean? If you're vibrating at a lower frequency, like if you don't have much food and your survival instincts are kicking in, you're vibrating at a very low sort of frequency that needs material, things. Literally, the biological needs aren't being met. But if you're comfortable and you've been fed and you're not on that lower frequency of survival, then you can be more open to sort of thinking about the things we're talking about right now. So I think, I think in terms of like frequencies and stuff like that, and our whole body that's what it is. And the more we can learn to relax, or, not just like hunger of the body, but like of the ego. Like if you're very concerned about, being valuable among this person or that person, and you're very focused on the self and differentiating it from everything else, you're going to have obsessions. You know what I mean? You're going to obsess about things. You're going to have complexes with people and yourself. But if you're just kind of vibrating past that, then your mind's a lot more free to imagine and to pick up these intuitions. You know what I mean? So that's how I think of it. The higher that you vibrate, and the higher the frequency that you can emanate, the more you can be creative. And the more that like your intelligence grows too. That's why meditation's so great, because that's what you learn to do by meditating. You surpass all the thoughts that you think are reality. I mean, you see reality a certain way based on a complex or a past experience, and it becomes like this form, and you're stuck seeing it that way, and you're sort of stuck there. So through meditation, you can get beyond those forms and those thoughts that just cycle your head every day. Everything's like a circle that we're trying to escape from. If we're meditating, we're trying to escape that same old circle of thoughts and complexes, so we can get to something more expansive. As far as like spiritually, samsara, enlightenment, we're trying to escape samsara, like a circle, right? So it's all about circles, man. And everything's circular, but we're trying to escape that to get to something more vast.
Right.
And so the way, if we learn to sort of vibrate differently and pick up different frequencies and send out different kinds of frequencies, that's the key to us like living more fulfilling lives, more creative lives, having more intuitive sort of thoughts. And so I mean, and that's like discipline too. You have to discipline yourself every day to not vibrate on that lower level. Otherwise you're just stuck, you're stuck focusing on the smaller things, your survival. But the ego's survival is the biggest, hindrance of all, to be able to sort of connect with others and to think about this stuff,
I
So,
have
stuff
to admit,
that scientists. Yeah, go ahead.
but no, I have always kind of wondered a certain level about the vibration thing, or something similar to what we're calling vibration, right? I almost have wondered if myself, for large parts of my life, I am really out of tune with everybody else, because sometimes you just feel like you walk into a room and you're just nice to everybody, but they're just not connected. You know what I'm saying? And you wonder, like, am I vibrating at a different, everybody else is at 85 megahertz and I'm at 75 megahertz, and it just isn't, and they intuitively are sensing it. And it creates a gap that I just can't seem to connect through.
Yeah, for sure. And that's energy. Energy's frequencies and the shape of your energy and the speed and the frequency that it's vibrating. I mean, it sounds like to someone who's not into spiritual stuff, well, that's pretty hippie-ish and vibes, but it's true. I mean,
and I'm not into spiritual stuff.
It's all movement. I mean, so you got these little particles that can be, broken down to literal, just mathematical probabilities and abstractions.
Right. That's
what's making that vibrate.
That's like that's and that's a physical explanation, not a spiritual one. It's
exactly.
Don't get me wrong. It might relate. I understand that a certain way of thinking that might relate to what somebody might consider spiritualism. But it doesn't have to. What I'm saying is if you're on a different vibration level, it could be 100%. That could be a 100% materialist explanation for what I'm talking about. Where you feel like you're not feel. It's not a matter of like, oh, I'm insecure and I'm not analyzing. No, I mean like you're able to objectively look and say, yeah, I'm not able to connect to people, and there's got to be an explanation for it. When you're in that situation, where you're like, is there something, you can go up to someone and be perfectly nice to them when they still seem to be nervous about you, and it's not like you're doing something threatening or intimidating or something like that. So I've experienced that. Definitely. I've never been able to. I can't really explain it when it happens. So that's the closest thing as an explanation to I come. I mean, and the frustrating part is you can't change it, or I don't know. It's not like it's not as easy as changing as like changing your behavior. Like if you're acting like a jerk, then there's a reason you're going to create this gulf between you and other people. But if you're not acting like a jerk, then you're kind of like, oh, what can I do? It's not.
If your energy just vibrates a certain way, can you change if it's not connecting to other people?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you don't want to. If you have to lower your vibration to a lower energy field, and that happens. Say you go to prison or something, right? They're not vibrating at a high energy level.
Yeah.
In order to survive in a prison, you have to vibrate at that primal, kind of level.
Yeah.
And but I would say you're capable of it. I think that's what spirituality is being conscious of that, of the things that we're made of besides just the physical, right? I think that's what spirituality is. It's seeing the consciousness of things and realizing that we are active within creating our reality, that we're co-creators. So I think the more that you can maybe see that, I'd like to think, maybe the answer is yes, you can change the way that you vibrate.
I'm not so sure. I mean, in theory, if you're doing something like meditation or something like that, there could be ways to, over a lifelong of practice or a lengthy time of practice, being able to adjust those things. But it's also possible that it's just kind of, you're born at a certain vibration level, and maybe something that's difficult to change. You're vibrating at a certain level, and everybody else is vibrating at another level, and maybe nobody's exactly at the same level, but it's a matter of some people are closer, and other people are vibrating at a more distant.
The shapes of the wavelengths, the shapes of them, if they're compatible,
something like that. Sure.
Like even with DNA, right? It fits like a lock and a key. If two organisms are compatible to mate, it's like the DNA code has negative, where the male one has positive, and it interlocks. So your wavelengths, the actual shape of the frequency that you emanate has a shape to it, and it can it jives well with the shapes of other people's. Maybe it's not even just like a matter of faster, slower, or higher, or stuff like that. Maybe it's just
terms, right? We're using
that's when I studied
it, but
just books I've studied about psychic vampirism and auras and stuff like that. That's one way they would explain it, is that your energy literally has like a shape.
All right, well, this is good shit.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.